Welcome to Agribusiness Matters. My name is Venki Ramachandran. Agribusiness Matters is an endeavor to discover system thinking in food and agriculture in an age of runaway climate change. I've been using the word systems thinking for quite some time, without really going into the into how I have applied to it, and I'm really excited to talk to a very old friend who's who is probably one of the India's foremost experts in system thinking and applying it in a very, very real world context. Thank you, Mihir, for joining us. I've been fortunate enough to have seen your work in the very early days, and in fact, I still have some of your books of the peak oil books that you had earlier shared with me, and also some of your earlier publications. So I'm really glad to have you in this podcast, Mihir.
Thank you very much, Venkat. And it's always great to meet old friends and have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Great, the pleasure is mine. As system thinking is a subject that has been captured my fascination for a very long time without really having sort of a word for it. You know, it took me a while to understand that these were the ways in which this is what this domain is called, right? And and from those days, like for me, the initiation started way back in 2009 there. And I was looking at your background. uh, why is it that those people who are from finance background always tend to get into system thinking? What is there? I mean, I'm not, you're not the only person I've seen, right? Maybe it may be worthwhile to kind of maybe give an introduction about how your journey began, and also maybe explore this question of why is it that this finance has this deep fascination with system thinking?
Interesting that you say that because I am actually not aware if finance people do get into systems thinking.
I have so many people in my network, so I might follow, who are all have come from a traditional finance, equity exchange background, but moved slowly into systems thinking. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Well, maybe I could give it a try. Why this happens? Uh, finance, modern finance, is a space where literally money is coming out of thin air.
Hmm.
So in that sense, it is very non-systemic. So, it is said that एक सच्चा नास्तिक ही एक सच्चा आस्तिक बन सकता है.
So एक सच्चा नास्तिकी और एक सच्चा come again, I didn't get that.
एक सच्चा नास्तिक ही एक सच्चा आस्तिक बन सकता है. It
Hmm.
is said that. So people who are on the other end of the spectrum, like I was a believer in growth. I used to believe that growth is good. I used to believe that growth is equal to prosperity.
Hmm.
That was my mental model and vision. And from there, I've taken like a 180 or a 360-degree turn, whatever you want to call that. And today I feel that growth is not equal to prosperity
Hmm.
and growth is not a necessity. So I think finance, when people study finance and believe in that model of finance, what money promises and where does money come from, they are like a Gnostic who don't believe, not believers in limits to growth, in saying world is finite. They don't believe in those concepts. Saying growth is here forever to stay. From there, this shift is like complete change in your belief systems. That's what happened with me back in 2009 when I was doing my research on commodities. I was a commodity analyst and an equity analyst in stock markets. So I was doing my research, and I'm a fundamentalist analyst. So I would study the fundamentals of every commodity, and especially oil that was given to me as a commodity. And I figured out that 70% of the cheap oil is over, and what is left is the difficult to find expensive oil. And that's when I realized that this whole promise of growth forever and growth is good is built on very, very fragile grounds, very fragile grounds. And I'm sitting on like on the peak, on the apex of that pyramid in the financial markets and the financial engineering and stock market game. So my own belief systems were getting challenged through my own research. Uh, so that was a bit of a crisis moment for me when that happened. Saying, well, uh, the future of energy, especially oil, doesn't look very promising. Uh, and then I studied more about oil and renewables and the whole limits to growth philosophy, and the idea that even renewable resources have limits to how much you can grow them or grow through them. So it was like a down the rabbit hole. I just went into that, and then I decided to shift careers and work on sustainability. And that's when I moved from stock markets to sustainability and worked in a climate change adaptation program in Pune at Watershed Organization Trust for 5 years. The good thing was that I got a chance to work with my professor who taught me systems thinking and modeling.
I see. Who is this?
There is Sushil Bajpai. He's from
Okay.
Pune. So I had two professors, Sushil Bajpai and Rajendra Raina.
Hmm.
Sushil Bajpai at that time was the director at WTR,
Hmm. Hmm.
director for strategy and research. So when my moments of crisis, when I was discovering this whole new truth,
Hmm.
I used to go to his house and have chat with him about all the radical things I'm finding. And he has had a similar journey. He used to talk about peak oil in my college days, and at that time it was an interesting intellectual exercise. How peak oil something can happen. But when I did it myself, I realized the gravity of the situation.
Hmm.
So I had long discussions with him, and then he offered me, "Why don't you publish something on this?" And that really got me excited, and that's how that publication happened.
Fascinating. I think there are a lot of parallels in our journey, also, right? Because I also had a professor who introduced me to this world, and Prithvi, if I'm sure you know.
Yeah,
Although for me it was not directly through systems thinking, but for me the question of what you're saying is deeply fascinating because we've been talking about this concept from systems thinking on limits to oil is way back in 70s, right? And that paper and there we've been talking about this in many, many ways. And still, uh, you know, there was a time in 2010, 11 when when my scales of my eyes dropped and you got to see this, right? You almost expected that there would be a moment when there would be like radical changes that would happen, right? Because that's at least initially, that's how you tend to think of something that is very profoundly hits you. You feel like, the whole world will change and you start to prepare yourself, right? I almost went through a phase where I thought that, we will all run out of, we will run out of whatever is our fragile constructions of wealth and started to look for deeper meanings of wealth. I started to look for ways to figure out to become, get into farming. And that's how my initiation into organic and agriculture also started in. But somewhere we realized that, in the hindsight, right, for me, when I now look back at 13 years in this journey has happened, the system still continues to chug along, right?
yeah.
For all the conversations around peak oil, I remember reading this analyst, one of the oil analysts who talks about that, like, we still have enough oil, right? And that's a myth or data or there, I don't know, right? Like, how
Mhm.
have you reconciled the way the system continues to chug along, creating a furthermore mirage of continuity? Do you kind of see that kind of anomaly, or does it bother you as an anomaly, or do you have a particular theory as to why it still continues to chug along?
Yes, and that's a very, very good question that you're asking. And only a person who has gone through the experience and the journey would actually ask this question. Very few have asked me this question because these have been my own conundrums, saying 2009 till now, it's 15 years. And actually, when I published that mini report book, uh, I called it, the subtitle was A Decade of Metamorphosis and Rapid Change.
Yeah,
That's what I
I
put
I
there.
have that book in my library.
2010 to 2020 is
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
thought things will change. Metamorphosis and rapid change. So rapid change, that reflects what I anticipated to happen. And we are in 2024 now.
Yeah.
Conversation. so so in some sense it is little, so there are layers to it. So it is little disturbing,
Mm,
to be honest. It is little disturbing saying the party continues.
mm,
And on what fundamental grounds is this party continuing? I still don't understand very
mm,
well. Stock markets are at 70,000 of index level. And that stock market thing is still there in my mind. So I keep looking at markets and PE values and the fundamentals. And are we still fundamentally strong? Where is this money coming from? Uh, so yeah, I do have a theory. It is disturbing, but I do have a theory now. So for example, the Cape Town water crisis,
mm,
uh, where when they said 0 day,
mm,
right? Cape Town will hit 0 days. 0 days when the city will run out of water completely.
mm,
But that 0 day never arrived,
mm.
right? It never arrived. That's because people started preparing and adjusting for it.
Correct.
So the water demand came down substantially. And as they saw benefits of that, more and more people joined and changed their consumption patterns. So it became like a community movement and a citizen movement where they started saving water, conserving water, and to some extent also restoring water supplies and increasing the rainwater harvesting systems. And the government got into the action and people got into the action. So it became like a moving target because this is coming, you start preparing for it, and then you push it little forward in time. And as you see success, you do more of it. So, and then rainfall happened eventually, and then the 0 day never happened. So, like Limits to Growth publication, the book, 1970s, it did have 7, 8 scenarios. And one of the scenarios was talking about an overshoot and then correction in the early 2000s. It really talked about that. Now people critique, see, models are wrong and systems thinking and modeling. Limits to Growth said this, nothing happened. It did not happen because Limits to Growth said that. And that's why it did not happen. So the projections and the scenario and the publication over time has built some awareness into the system. And of course, we have become more energy efficient and stuff like that. And because it said so, the scenario did not come true in its entirety. So it has been pushed forward. That doesn't mean that it will never happen. It doesn't mean that peak oil will never happen, peak water will never happen. But because we are making changes, as we are getting aware and as the alarm bells ring, it has this tendency to push the date in future. So people feel that the party can continue because we still have enough. Those who are not really, going through the journey that I and you have gone through. That's how I theorize it.
Fascinating answer. Thank you. I think, what really strikes me, and we can go in multiple directions from what you shared here, but what really strikes me is actually also a certain sense of inevitability of also understanding that, no matter how much we talk about systems thinking, we still can't comprehend the full system in its entirety, right?
Very true. Very true.
And I think that's something that's also equally been hitting me hard in my 10, 11 years of this work also.
Very true.
I haven't done that academically, formally as you have done, but purely from the practice and the work that I've been doing, I've been exploring this question there. And I'm also been realizing that at one level, like I was reading your article with the idea on the India Development Review, where you talked about having a system on systems change, right? And you
Mhm.
almost give this analogy of people trying to push the car from back and front, right? And I see that every day in, day out in my work that I do, right? Both I work in the areas of agri-tech, but I also work equally with non-profit and development organizations. And pretty much everybody today now that the language has been so normalized, right? Like the language has become normalized in terms of everybody is talking about systems thinking, everybody is talking about decarbonization. Uh,
Mhm.
but but somewhere there is also a sneaky sense of we are still co-opting the language, but without really being true to, without really being true to the essence of what we really mean, right? So
Very
just like greenwashing, right? Like while I was preparing for your interview and I was researching in it, I realized that just like greenwashing, perhaps there should be also a phrase called a systems washing.
super.
So I'm curious because I remember I was reading your article where you gave these interesting aspects of when when do we recognize a systems thinking approach, right? And also you had also talked about that we can't still see the whole, right? So from your experience, given that you are not just talking about systems thinking from a very theoretical lens, but you're also applying it in real world, do you have these indicators in your mind, like the BS indicators that tell you that this is systems washing and not systems thinking?
So the buzz of systems thinking has grown in the last 10, 12 years.
Correct.
And if you look at IDR website, they actually recently published a couple of weeks back buzzword of the year. And what was the buzzword of the year? Systems thinking. Every year they publish this. What is the buzzword for this year? And for the first time, it was systems thinking. I was very tempted to actually reply to that post and actually typed it and then I deleted it. What I typed it, I'll reveal now. I said that this buzzword of systems thinking. So what they wrote in that small post was, is your proposal even complete if it doesn't have the word systems thinking in it? So when I read that, I was tempted to say this is like bad cholesterol for the development sector. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. Because if you're using systems thinking for proposals and fundraising only, and I would like to underline the word only and make it bold, then it is trouble. Then it is rubber stamp, like rubber stamp. It's serving a purpose of a rubber stamp. That is problematic. And systems washing, I agree, because everybody is talking about systems thinking, systems change. So everybody is supposed to talk about it. And that's when it gets systems washing. So it's very hard to figure out indicators, how you can quickly understand if this is real systems thinking, if there is commitment or not. It's very difficult because even the language, everybody's using it now, and they are investing time and effort to learn the language and use it. Now, it requires a bit of involvement with organizations and people to truly understand how far they want to go into this effort or into the subject of systems change and systems thinking. How sincerely, how seriously they are thinking about applying it for transforming systems. So the only way to know whether it is systems washing or real systems commitment is to have conversations with people, spend some time with them to understand. Otherwise, in the next 3 5 years, we'll see how many people are still committed to it and actually investing, sincerely investing in that, or it's just a buzzword.
Yeah, I mean, I want to share some reflections on this, right? Like, for instance, for me, one of the things I have been sort of building this filters in me, at least to get a sense of, some of the problematic areas in which systems washing happens, is by developing certain heuristics, right? Like, for instance, when we try to map a circular reality, a circular kind of causality as a linear causality. When you tend to try to find the root cause. We are talking about root cause because, I mean, those are some of the heuristics that I have developed there. And that's where I was very eager to see if you have certain heuristics that kind of tell you that, like, if you are following, even if you're talking about systems thinking, but if you're doing, like, you talk about in your one of your articles, you talk about that when there are no explicit goals and when so the goals of the parts are not aligned with the emergent goal of the whole, then you can't see the whole, right? So the question then comes is that, is there a is there an inevitability of us to really not really fully understand the system, right? Because the more you push the boundary, you realize that there are far more boundaries that they can't be understood, right? Like for instance, we tend to develop certain models and heuristics in our head, right? Like I was telling you, right? For me, is approach problem being approached unidimensionally, or is are we applying, like for instance, in methane emissions, right? People tend to confuse methane emissions with biogenic emissions, right? So in which case you're trying to map a linear with a circular there. But are there any specific heuristics that kind of give you a sense of when it is like when there are risks to, or when there is system washing?
Yeah, so my school of thought on systems thinking is very applied. It originates from Meadows' work, and in modern days, John Sterman and Khalid Said's work, and of course, J. Forrester's original text on systems, principles of systems. So my school of thought on systems is coming from MIT, and a bit on the modern hard science of systems thinking. So when I look at the work of organizations and people do on systems change and systems thinking, I'm always wanting to look at some artifacts that they put there as models, which show their hypothesis, which explain their hypothesis, and how they are actually detecting change or thinking about change. So we talk about theory of change, and people say, "Oh, we use systems thinking for developing theory of change." But when I look at their diagrams, they are still linear. Those diagrams are still linear. They are still compartmentalized. So when I see those artifacts being showing up on company websites or company reports, I realize that this is still not, the systems thing had not seeped in, has not seeped in to the work. I give them the benefit of doubt that they're knocking on the doors of systems thinking and systems change, but not yet there in sense of it has not seeped in to the organization or to the people. So to simplify things, I just look for quickly. I look for some systems diagrams or artifacts to be able to see. Uh, Having said that, I also say that simply because you cannot make a model doesn't mean you're not a systems thinker. That has been a bit of a problem with the systems thinking or systems thinking community, that they want to first see a model and then evaluate if you're a systems thinker or a modeler. Fine, for the modeling part, it's okay. So if you're a computer modeler, you have to make a computer model. That I agree. But to be able to think in systems, you should not be slaves of a computer diagram, right? So having said that, I still feel organizations and people can think in systems without making diagrams. And that's why it's important to have conversations with them. So I would typically invest some time, and that's my real filter and check, where I understand the philosophy and the depth and the intent of people and organizations. Otherwise, if I have to just look at the reports and things, then I would want to look at some hard artifacts or diagrams.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting answer that he's saying that thinking in systems is far more important than necessarily creating the models, right? Uh, you know, today today we are in a kind of a in a world where even even fundamental ideas of truth, in fact, don't have clear systems, right? Especially after pandemic, this has been like a big shift for me that that our subjective experience of reality is so different that you can't really say that we are in the same systems, or we are in the same kind of systems that we all look at, right? So which has been a very difficult question for me to grapple with, right? Like so in which case while we trying to model certain systems and we think in systems, but the question of each one's subjective reality and what they've shaped their reality is there. So always becomes a question of trying to really understand in are we existing even in a common world, in a shared world or shared existence, right? So do you sort of grapple with these questions as well in terms of looking at systems from an inner landscape, from in terms of the beliefs and thought patterns, and how especially there is at least I don't know, I can't really scientifically prove this, but somewhere there has been a certain shift after the pandemic of a certain kind of acknowledgement. There's no such thing as a shared reality. Like today, you look at the concepts of the fake news phenomenon or the misinformation phenomenon. Like, or I mean, I was just reading the Trump's kind of plans for the next term, which has completely a climate denial based agenda that he has. So when you look at all of these aspects, do you also explore some of sort of inquire into these fundamentals of is there a shared reality in the first place to build these systems?
Yeah. So I, 10, 15 years back, I wanted a bit of a world order. I was always thinking that change will happen top down. Well, that was my training. I'm like a trained MBA, MBA of finance, and we talk about order and everything and controllability. So I was still waiting for conference of parties that happens at climate change conferences where there will be consensus someday, and when that consensus happens, big change will happen. And it's been 15 years, and I've been waiting for it. So what I realized now, Venki, is that you need to find alignment in small pockets. You need to find alignment in small pockets, in small geographies, localized local circles of change are pretty powerful by themselves. We are waiting for the big change to happen, and there's no alignment there really. And I don't see how and when that could happen by itself. So, do we share a common reality, as you're saying? I don't think the world together can share a common reality. I don't think that's possible, simply because of the diversity that exists. I mean, imagine that half of the world is sleeping right now. So, how can we ever say that the whole world will have a common shared dream? So, I feel that it's you stand a better chance if you can sync your belief systems and mental models at a small group level. And fundamentally, if the belief systems and worldviews are aligned, it's much easier to co-create. It's much easier to work together. One of the challenges in conference of parties is all to do with policy design, right? Policy design, and then there is this whole. I mean, it's a mess. It's diplomatic. People are always finding loopholes. It is designed in a way that allows you to backtrack your commitments and all that stuff. Now, why is that happening? Because at a fundamental level, the belief systems and worldviews are not aligned. So it's becoming very difficult to co-create a global climate solution, right? So if the fundamental level belief systems, worldviews are aligned, policies are easy to make. Sometimes we don't even make policies, we get on with things. And in retrospect, we make a policy. So policies also emerge out of the common belief systems and the vision that we have of what we want to co-create. So community responses are rooted in that theory. So when pandemic happened, COVID-19, and when we were running out of hospital beds, a lot of societies self-organized themselves and converted their club areas, schools, into makeshift hospital beds. Now, there was no mandate coming from the top that you have to do this, but people self-organized themselves and gave this response, right? And it's good that you bring up the pandemic as an example. I feel humans cooperate under two conditions. One is when they have a common purpose, or when they have a common threat, which then becomes a purpose. COVID-19, to some extent, was that. We all faced a common threat. And in light of the common threat, we cooperated much better. We co-created much better for the benefit of all, including us. So we were able to self-organize ourselves. So the alignment there was not by design. There was no choice there. There was a common thread. So we had to align. But when you talk about conscious action for sustainability, climate, that's when you're not able to see these threats the same way. You may be seeing it differently, I may be seeing it differently. And that's why there's not enough alignment happening, and that's why there is not enough co-creation and collaborative work happening. Forget about global and big scales.
Mm.
Even at a small scale, if you can start, I think that's very effective.
Yeah, I think this conversation is going in a very fascinating trajectory that it kind of mirrors some of my inner dilemmas and inner struggles that I've held with. See, one of the, Samir, I've been
Hmm.
having this debate with Samir for a very long time. Whenever I meet Samir in common meetings and there, and that where do we draw the, trade-offs between a fractal approach to change as opposed to fighting against change, right? Like for instance, uh, I have a lot of friends, people who understand the systems thinking paradigm very deeply and are very beautifully located in their fractal, right? You get what I'm saying, right? They're located in their agent, their local community, as you rightly said, and are creating changes in multiple dimensions, right? And then there is also these another group of people like, let's say Bill McKibben, or, I'm just thinking of him there as we speak now. And there are other people who are maybe located in a certain local context and working in a local community, but they're also continuously trying to push for change, right? Like trying to fight against it. Like there are now today, especially with climate change, there are a whole bunch of climate activists, newer generation of activists that are coming up and asking questions and constantly challenging and fighting against the system at large, right? So it's always been this debate, and Samir stayed with me for some time back when he had come to Hyderabad, and we were having this debate that is should we fight for change, or should we get comfortable with the fractal approach of change? I wonder
Yeah.
if you reconcile, if you are able to, if you have a way to see when do we kind of, you're getting what I'm saying, right? You're getting the, in terms of, like when you're fighting, you're looking at a bigger system and whole. You're not just getting comfortable with your local fractal systems there. And that was a
Mm-hmm.
debate Samir and I was having. I was advocating for a fractal kind of, I mean, I call it a fractal right now because in many ways, like the small change that I do can create a huge impact, right? And so you also know that you can't change the entire world, you can't change the entire system, you can't bring big transformation. So you locate yourself in a context where you can bring certain change in a very, very infinitesimal level and small levels there, right?
Yeah.
So have you looked at this conundrum per se in terms of the small versus the parts versus the whole?
Yes, indeed, I have. And so these are like continuous challenges. It is not that some days I look at it and some days I don't. All that we have been talking about and all the questions you have been asking, I live and breathe through that every day, every moment. Sometimes they surface out and I talk about it. Sometimes they're back in my mind, but they're always there. So there is this tension between small and big parts and whole subsystems and the bigger system. So one of the reasons why I've not been able to decide on buying a house in a city or anywhere is because I feel the larger system is not ready for me to invest in a smaller system which is part of this larger system. So when the larger whole system is so
I took
unsustainable,
13 years to buy.
I know. So when I heard you that,
I almost I had decided not to buy, and it took me now what now 14 years, and so now I took 14 years to decide that. Yeah, yeah. We'll talk
exactly,
about
exactly.
that.
So that's a different conversation to have. But yeah, so I'm also on the cusp of deciding something. Maybe a couple of years it might still take me to decide. But my whole point is that okay, fine. This vicinity where I live, this area, I can think about an environment, home, and stuff like that, land based. But the larger system that I'm part of within this vicinity, and then the larger system that system is part of, all that is screwed up to some extent. It faces all the challenges that we can think about. So what happens to my small system that I'm trying to make sustainable? Does it stand a chance? And inherent vulnerabilities are always there. So you cannot see, you can run, but you cannot hide. That's the story, right? So you can make these pockets of sustainability, but when things become vulnerable, and when vulnerability actually strikes, everything will be impacted. So that is a bit of a frustration that I also have, and sometimes it leads to inaction, saying, okay, fine, uh, 20 people, 20 families coming together, buying 200 acres of land, and thinking of community living in the outskirts, or in some area which is closer to forest, is great. But does this really mean anything in the larger systems change that we are seeing? So sometimes it leads to inaction on my part, when I feel a call to say, let's do this, let's build a community, let's become a part of people who are doing something meaningful on ground, physical. I'm almost ready to take a decision, and then these thoughts come to my mind, and I backtrack, saying, would this really really make a difference? How long will this small sustainable system last? And what are we trying to do here? So
Yeah, it's a conundrum I also face continuously, and that's the reason I was saying, as I was saying, I bought a house recently from while exploring and navigating, mulling through these challenges, right? Because I too had these dreams that I will buy. The idea of when you look at systems thinking and you look at this other approach, you tend to think that at least let me be the sane one in the world of chaos. Right? Let me go and buy a farm, or do practice a certain kind of living there where at least I can retain my sanity. But then you also realize that just because you're running away from the problem doesn't mean the problem will run away from you.
very
Right.
true, very
So
true.
so which is where I decided at some stage that to be inside the system, in whatever capacity I can, and create a context in which I'm also able to push the boundaries in whatever ways I can, right? Which actually brings me to also this question of I mean, I want to bring this to a slightly in Indian context also, right? Like there was this famous uh, uh, I think a policy theorist who said that Indians tend to do very well in mission mode thinking. uh, I think it was by Devesh Bajpayee or not, if I'm not wrong. But the moment we tend to look at systems that don't have a mission mode, Indians tend to kind of not do a great thing, right? Like we organize Kumbh Mela with all its chaos because there is a mission mode. But the moment we step out of it, there is we don't tend to do a good job, right? So that is there something from a system thinking perspective that kind of worthwhile looking at it, and also from the question of uh like you know when do you so there are enough people. There is one section of climate deniers who say this is all bullshit. There is also another section of climate deniers who say that the system is far more intelligent than you all of us humans who are thinking it, right? So it will self correct its own way. Why the hell are you really racking your head around this, right? There's also that paradox that is there, right? So I wonder how you kind of look at. I mean, I know you talked about inaction, but I'm also wondering, in what ways do we really deal with these questions also?
So mission mode. Uh, so it is. I tend to agree with that fact. Mission. So I am still a believer in having common vision. I believe that shared vision is absolutely must for alignment and for any practical work to start. But I'm realizing through my practice and running a consulting firm now is the importance of missions. Mission is what I feel now will make you get up in the morning and work to achieve something with great motivation for that moment in time. That is what mission helps you to do. Vision is what helps you to stick, but then you can stick and just linger around and not go anywhere. Mission is what gets you, operationally active and motivated. So absence of mission with a vision is not really good, I feel. Even a consulting project like consulting work like mine, when organizations ask us to do things, we do great things. But when organizations are not asking us, Are we still creating great things? That is how it is.
Fascinating question. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is what it is. So, of course, I mean, I'm busy, but I'm not like busy all day, every day for an entire year. So when I'm not busy is when I ask the question, what am I doing? Because that is the space where I'm supposed to self-critique and reflect. Of course, when somebody is paying me, I'm doing work. So what is so great about it? Everybody's doing that. What is it that I'm doing when nobody is asking me to do anything? That is where I think creation happens for a very deep purpose. And that is where the role of mission is important. Kumbh Mela, you gave the example. When there is a marriage happening, how families come together and operationalize. It is also a question of traditions. Indian traditions are built with a purpose. If you study those, the reason for the way Holi is celebrated in different parts of the country, those customs also have a strong linkage with sustaining people's livelihoods, creating and destroying small infrastructures so that masons and other artisans can rebuild it. And that's how they get their livelihoods as a seasonal activity.
Yeah, there is a ritual to throw stone also at the roof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these customs, traditions, rituals have a meaning to it. Today, we are so separated from that meaning that it has become a meaningless consumption practice. All these rituals, marriages have become a waste generating activity. The marriage events, Holi, Ganpati, all these have become so different today that they're just producing more and more waste. But that's not how they originated, right? There was a mission behind it. There was a vision behind it, and they were serving some purposes. So there's a power of tradition there. Kumbh Mela, for all we know, it might have started for a very different purpose, actually serving people and the community. So there's a power of tradition, power of custom there embedded. So missions are very, very important, I feel. And there should be a personal mission also to what you do that gets you on your laptop or on the field or to people for what you want to achieve.
Yeah, and how do you explore navigate the second point we talked about, self-correcting ability of the system vis-a-vis our ability to influence and change, right? Because I could still very well, like, I know sometimes I was just having this conversation with a friend yesterday. When I look at the kind of changes that are required for agriculture, sometimes they are so daunting, right? That I could very well say, I am hoping that the system will self-correct itself, and I can quit this thing and go back to my technology world, right?
Yeah.
But these are questions that come up in our mind sometimes, right? In terms of like when to what extent you can believe or you can trust the self-correcting ability of the system, and how do you discover your agency given a self-correcting ability of the system or the self-organizing ability of the system?
So in the starting, we talked about the Cape Town example that the zero day never arrived, and how come the party is still continuing, and how come the systems are juggling or rather stumbling towards something. That's because real world systems, living systems, are self adaptive in nature, right? They have the ability to self adapt, self organize. Uh, how much can we trust the self organizing ability? Uh, Hard to say, because under a given purpose, do we self organize ourselves? So the COVID outbreak happened, and people converted their clubhouses and schools into hospital beds. There was a purpose behind that, and that purpose drove the self organization or the self organization that happened at that pace and at that time. If we respond late, then we are not really responding; we are reacting. So it is not really adaptation; it is bad coping.
Mm.
It is
Mm.
bad coping.
Mm.
So that is the worry. Of course, humans have the ability, and we have the brain and the ability to cooperate and believe in the story, which is great. That helps us to stick together. But my worry is that are we running out of time where we move from proactive adaptation towards bad coping? So self organization, self adaptation will happen. But when it happens, is determine where we are going.
Great. I think it's a fascinating exploration of proactive adaptation versus coping, bad coping, right? Because, it's a question I come back to. I mean, I was going to ask you also the specific question around, like, there's almost, it almost feels very much alive to this question around climate mitigation and adaptation, right? Because today, I know well-meaning entrepreneurs who tell me that they've lost hope with Earth and say that, it's better we look at ways to build Mars colonies and explore some of those thinking, right? I thought first thought it was a joke, and then I realized that there are people who are actually serious about it.
Yeah,
So in which case it's a question of like there are like, for instance, right, when there is heat waves, right, let's talk more in a agricultural context, right? Gujarat, with the amount of heat wave that we are seeing, at least in certain parts of the Gujarat, you can expect the temperatures go really high, and so so there is a question of, like, how do I address that problem, right? Like, for especially for cows, and so now one set of people are looking at the solution of saying, okay, let me install AC shelters for cows, and do that kind of a way, which is again which will ensure that somewhere else gets further heated with an island effect, right?
yeah, yeah,
And but then the other option is saying that, why even have cows, and let's get rid of cows because cows emit methane. So these are very tricky, naughty questions that are often may look like easy answers when you do system thinking, but we have only scratched the surface and we've gone further deep into these problems, right? I'm wondering if you have a certain framework that kind of helps you give a good clarity of, when does adaptation vis-a-vis, mitigation and, kind of make sense.
yeah. Uh, Whatever activities we do to adapt has to necessarily lead to mitigation. That's my simple one-line framework. And I learned this from Sushil Bajpayee when I was working with him on the climate change adaptation program that we implemented in 50 villages. So I worked for 5 years, working in different parts of Maharashtra and conducting some studies on climate risks and implementing renewable energy and stuff like that. So, whatever we do to adapt must necessarily lead to mitigation all the time. If if this happens, then I would say we are in the right direction. Now, putting up air conditioner in this room is also a kind of adaptation only. Does it lead to mitigation? It does not. So I would say that's a bad adaptation, uh, right? Simply doing mitigation, does that lead to adaptation? I'm not sure. It does, right? We can have carbon capture and storage.
Yeah.
Is it adaptation? I don't think so.
Mhm.
It is not adaptation.
Mhm.
So we should not separate the two. I would say all adaptation activities should lead to mitigation.
Mhm.
And I say this in sequence. I say adaptation first. So think about adaptation first.
Mhm.
All adaptation should lead to mitigation.
No, I think it's a great framework. It really brings a lot of clarity there in dealing with some of these questions. Yeah. No, I mean, and also there's a question of, we talked earlier about energy and oil, right? Which is again another aspect that I always been very struggling to grapple, right? Like especially in agriculture, where there is confluence of energy, water, and land, right? There is always this tricky aspect of how do you navigate the trade-offs, right? Like, for instance, like, there are people, I was reading this book called Climate Capitalism, which talks
Hmm.
about installing solar PV cells on top for farmers' lands, right? And the logic is that, you can through that you can generate cheap electricity and also make some money, and
Hmm.
at the same time you can also pursue agriculture, right? So now the question comes is that obviously wherever there are cheap electricity there, we tend to abuse the land, abuse the water, right? If I draw the systems map, if I give
Hmm.
more electricity, I tend to abuse the water, right? wherever there is water, wherever there is no electricity there, at least they've been able to conserve water, right? And so, and so that's where we get into these linkages there, right? In terms of to what extent do we sort of look at the this interlocking of energy, water, and land aspects there, right? So do you have, I mean, I know it's maybe difficult to put it in this kind of a verbal kind of conversation there, but I'm wondering, do you have a way to very simplify it and get a sense of for people to look at how to think about, because it's a question, because I talk to academicians, they give me the complex diagrams about how food, land, water, energy is there. Somewhere there is not a simple heuristic for people to get a sense of what is the right thing to do, right? And that's where I'm kind of trying to explore that. Is there a simple way to, a simple but that doesn't simplified, way to look at these three intersections more deeply?
Yeah, so we did do a program designed for regenerative agriculture using systems thinking. And towards the end of that work, a framework started emerging in my head about how you can potentially, a small framework, like 4 things that you need to evaluate or test for all that you want to do on your farm, and evaluate if those activities are positive for the environment, positive for the people, and positive for the livelihood that you're doing. So I do have that. I don't remember that exactly, but maybe I can open the slide and read it out. Yeah.
Sure, we could do that also. I mean, maybe if you have like a diagram there, maybe you can explore that also, because it's a question today, especially given that now government is trying to bring a lot of subsidy for solar. I feel it's an important topical question that I think it's very, very important.
I agree. And we must also remember that all our knowledge is evolving. We have still not reached there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
of course.
especially in agriculture, although we have been doing agriculture for like now 12,000 years, but with time, even our knowledge of agriculture, modern agriculture, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, it's all evolving. And it's good that it's evolving. It shows that we are adapting to change. All right. I have managed to open the slide.
You want to share it
So
and
should I
maybe
just
walk us through, or
I'll
we can do
project?
it. We can do it. We can read walk through also. Yeah.
I'll project.
Sure.
So this is what just emerged in the workshop and started typing down. So this has not been tested yet, but I'm quite open for sharing this and getting your views. So impact assessment of region agriculture activities. So you have to think from 4 dimensions. So what is the impact on climate change? And in climate, you have to think about 2. Is your regenerative agriculture improving the ability to sequester carbon and also reduce emissions? Both. That's one that you need to assess. Second is impact on natural resources, which is soil, the impact on land, and biodiversity. So actually, region agriculture should increase the extent of biodiversity on farm, at least. I am of the opinion actually that a healthy forest is very important for a healthy farm. I am of that opinion. And I feel forests and farms should coexist, at least adjacent to each other. Otherwise, if the farm is inside the forest, then there is always this possibility of the farm invading the forest. That's what people end up doing, encroaching forest lands for growing food. So at least if not inside, then coexistence adjacent to each other. And the health of the forest or the biodiversity of the forest then provides nutrient services for the farm. And that's how the fertility of the soil and the cycles continue. So I would stretch it to the extent saying that all your regenerative agriculture should also regenerate the surrounding ecosystem, not just farm-based ecosystem or farm-based biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're also saying is that you can't separate water, from the soil or anything, right? Because see, I mean, this is good at a philosophical level, right? But in practicalities, what happens is like when you're in implementation scenarios there, right? Like there comes almost a question of like, do I do a trade-offs? right? And that's where I was trying to see if, somewhere where we can, address this there. Maybe later we can have a separate conversation on this to see if there's some way where we could, to kind of look at this closely. Or is there some kind of a way to help people who are taking real life decisions, right? To kind of navigate the trade-offs there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So, to switch gears there, right? One of the, maybe this is again a very, I don't know how you'll relate to this question, but I'll still bring it up, right? Like one of the ways in which people are coping, right? You talked about adaptation versus coping, right? One of the ways people are coping with climate change is to not have children at all, right? Because there is a certain sense of understanding that, like, things are anyway going to get bad. Why bring a next generation into it,
Yeah.
right? So I have a 6-year-old. So but I have realized also that this is a very valid stance to take in as well, right? I am not looking at it with a lens of judgment here, but I have always been able to. I've been struggling to put an understanding of this from a systems lens, right? From a systems lens perspective, right? Like humans have been designed to procreate in some sense. When I look at it from a systems perspective, right? To procreate and take our, like, we've been passed on. Like, a friend of mine had put it this idea that we have inherited traits from our ancestors, like, the traits and whatever cultural traits. It'd be cultural traits or genomic traits or physical traits or whatever traits you want to call it, right? And it is our responsibility to pass on to the ancestors, I mean, to our future progenies and there, right? One of my friend told me this in one of the conversations there, right? And whereas the other thought is that, like, given how the environment is going to be, what is the use in doing that, right? But I'm wondering if there is some kind of a systems thinking approach that kind of looks at this with a certain sense of clarity and objectivity in looking at this question.
I don't know if there's a systems thinking framework.
No,
It
I'm
is,
not asking a framework, but from a systems
yeah,
thinker's mind, how do you look at it?
it is. It is just rooted in the idea of hope. I think children give us hope, to be honest. The greatest wealth we have is, I think, it's children.
Mm.
We are limited by whatever has been programmed in our minds through our education, culture, and all that, and the ability that we have to be able to unlearn and relearn. But children have this phenomenal ability to think laterally by, as you know, naturally. So naturally, humans are systems thinkers, and then education happens, and then we start compartmentalizing things, right, and specializing into it. So children, I think, are the greatest wealth that people have, humans have. So I think children give us a lot of hope. Uh, so that is one simple thing which I believe in, and that's what makes me feel that having children, uh, having a child, is not always a negative thing. Having too many children in one family by one couple, that that era is, I think, is over, simply because of the impacts it is
Nuclear
creating.
families anyways have mitigated that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think in that sense we are sorted uh, from the impact of the environment.
No, but see, this is also a question of the parts as a whole, right? Like today, China is regretting the fact that they went for a one-child policy, right? They are now, in fact, encouraging people to have more children, right?
Yeah,
At a collective level, in fact, given the decline in fertility levels,
yeah.
countries are at a collective level, countries are doing policies and coming up with nudges for making people to have more children, right? Whereas, and there is a certain sense of consensus, right? Like for a long time, we thought that population was a big problem for climate change. But now we realize that population is not a problem, but it's in terms of our adaptability is there. Right? At least there is a certain sense of consensus. At least I see that there. Right? Whereas at an individual level, like when I look at my circles, I see that there are far more parents, like, I mean, my generation of people of my age, who've decided not to have children for various reasons, right? And climate change also being a very prominent reason. And that's where I was exploring this question of like, is there a way to grapple with this there in today's context there? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, true. I also have friends and people who have decided not to have children. And while the reasons may be different from climate change, but I think they are all interrelated. Uh, the overall pressures that we are facing, economic, resource constraints, climate, all these are interlinked. I think the overall environment, social, ecological, economic environment is becoming more and more difficult for people to peacefully have children and raise them. And I think to avoid that exponential increase in the stress, people say, okay, no children. The reasons could be varied, but it does still reflect the deteriorating state of the overall environment that we're living in.
You know, and I'm really loving it, the fact that you brought it and hope there, right? It just also brings me to the question of as parents, like right now my son is going through his summer holidays, and I've been exploring variety of things with him. And one of the exploration is also is that how do we get children, like you said, they are natural system thinkers, right? In terms of popularizing systems thinking and making people also start to see things from a systems level. What have been your insights and what are the things that have worked well in your experience, and what can we do to encourage people to look at this from this kind of lens?
You're talking about children picking up
Yeah,
systems.
children education or broadly also. I'm just even for children. Children. It feels like we don't have to do unless we don't have to intervene them, right? At least we don't have to stop them from thinking systems in. But at
Yeah,
least from a broader society perspective, are there anything things that could be done that will help people to I mean, it's a very difficult problem at one level to drop your scales.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
I think if we have to give them the environment. So my son would often look at me reading books on, and you know what topics my would be reading more often. Uh, and at a very young age, he was I think 5 or 6 years of age. He picked up Thinking Systems by Donald Meadows and started reading that simply because I was reading it the other day. And then I was reading one more book, I think 2 months back, The Psychology of Money, because my relationship with money had changed from when I moved from stock markets to sustainability. And now I am rethinking my relationship with money. So I was reading that book. And then he also picked it up and read that. And then he actually wrote his own book on my psychology of money. He actually drew a book and wrote some things in it. Uh, so children learn from their environment. Children learn from their environment. I think it's our responsibility to give them the kind of environment we think will help them retain their natural learning abilities. It will help them retain their natural abilities to think in systems. It is our responsibility. Now, some things we may be doing consciously, some things would be happening on its own. That's fine. Because we also live in a bigger environment where parties happen in malls and in food courts where consumption is the norm. So my son goes for these birthday parties, and I get a little frustrated after a point in time, saying, "What is going on here?" So I mean, we live in a bigger world, so I have to also give him the agency that he can explore and pick and choose what he wants to do. But from my side, I would always want to give him the environment where his natural learning abilities and systems thinking abilities flourish. That is my commitment to myself, without necessarily fighting the bigger world that we are part of, because that's the reality that we live in. Uh, so that is what I feel. And then, of course, I mean, the choice of the school that we have made, where he goes to study, we made a conscious choice. We actually had to shift cities to be able to get admission and get him into a free progress open learning environment school. And I am actually very keen to start systems thinking in schools. I have a few people who are wanting to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, I just need resources, people who can go and teach, who
Nice.
are
Would love to
certified.
invite you to Hyderabad, where my son studies, and I'm part of the school's community there. So maybe we could explore that as well. Yeah, but great. I mean, I think it's more needed now for schools than ever.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, there was recently in my son's school. My son also goes to a very fairly progressive alternative school,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and recently they had their own simulated elections
Okay. Okay.
because elections are going on. So
Nice.
I mean, my son is 6 years old.
Ah,
So, and he went and voted for somebody, and he was sharing his experience there. And that's when I was realizing that, yeah, it is important to create simulations of our systems for them to play with, because at the end of the day, they are asking for, give me do whatever what you are doing. Right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I
Exactly.
think yeah, and yeah, are you building specific tools for systems for educators context, or is it more like popularizing the concepts and themes?
No, no. I want to like. Uh, so it requires a bit of training. So you will have to learn how to bring systems thinking to children,
Hmm.
and there are available pedagogies, uh, very well established. The founder of the field, System Dynamics, the founder of this field, Jay Forrester, he actually moved to K-12 education in his later days. And he just invested a lot of time teaching children system dynamics for good 20, 30 years. And there are organizations, international agencies who have dedicated their entire work on bringing systems thinking to schools and children. So you can become a certified educator if you do the course, and they will supply you material and put you part of a community and also teach you. So there is a structure there, and we should take advantage of that and get people trained into the pedagogy. And I am there to do whatever I can do in my own network and connections for getting this going. Unfortunately, I'm too busy running a consulting firm and making money, so I don't have time to uh, learn this and then get into schools, at least for now. So I have a couple of people who are wanting to do this, and hopefully it'll happen soon.
Great, thank you. I think this was a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it, and uh, this is a subject that as you peel the onion, you want to peel more.
Uh,
So I have few more questions that I had planned for, but I will maybe plan that for another more longer conversation, which maybe we can do it as a follow up to this. But for now, to address some of these inner dilemmas when I'm just about to head to a vacation. So I think these questions were really helpful for me to, and what you shared are really helpful for me to sort of self reflect on some of the work that I'm doing and there, and I hope the people who are listening in will also benefit from some of these questions there. So thank you very, very much for taking the time on this morning to speak with Agribusiness Matters.
Thank you very much, Venki, and thank you for asking these profound questions. I think they mean a lot to me when somebody asks these questions, because I learn a lot by having these conversations, and it keeps the flame alive in me. So thank you for that.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you. Thank you so much.